The first one that we're going to be reading is actually somebody's lost bet. That's right. This article was written as the consequence of somebody's bet on, I think it was like center-left politics or something like that, which reads, "Take which I thought was ice cold but is apparently hot. Biden isn't going to run for president. I doubt that he has even seriously considered running for president since being VP. The man is going to be 77 by the time the election rolls around. He's older than both Bernie and Trump, and unlike those two, he's not the singular leader of a factional splinter. If he runs, then I will write a 10,000-word essay on the geopolitics of Spongebob Squarepants, or something." End quote. So this is a 10,000-word essay on the geopolitics of Spongebob Squarepants, posted to medium.com. Table of contents. 1. Methuselah. 2. A roadmap to madness. 3. Flora, fauna, etc. 4. The city-state theorem. 5. The empire theorem. 6. The apocalypse theorem. 7. Babel. 8. A858DE45F56D9BC9. 9. Nevertheless, they persisted. 10. Where we go from here. Appendix. Works cited. A quick note on the citations. They are often competing claims for the exact episode number for a given episode. Where there have been conflicting numbers, I have supplied the one most commonly given. I cannot guarantee them being 100% accurate. So, this is rock bottom, eh? God damn it! I am a risk-averse person. I do not make bets that I will lose. I was absolutely positive that Joe Biden would not run for president. I was so certain, in fact, that on October 13th at approximately 4 in the afternoon, I declared that if he ran for president, I would write a 10,000-word essay on the geopolitics of SpongeBob. I do not make bets I do not intend to follow through on. So, here you go, you filthy animals. Part 1. Methuselah. SpongeBob SquarePants is a modern-day Methuselah. Perhaps it's fitting. After all, sea sponges were among the very first animals to appear on Earth. They have always been here. They will be here long after we are dead. So is the case with the character. His 20 years of existence are no doubt merely a fraction of what will come to pass. He has outlived his creator, and so will he outlive you and I. He will be the one constant in our lives and the lives of our great-great-grandchildren. We shall all live in constant fear of being followed by his nasal staccato laughter. Ah! Sorry. Where was I? Oh, right. For the purposes of this essay, I shall confine the parameters rigidly but not arbitrarily. The only episodes which shall be considered canonical world building shall be seasons 1 through 3. This is not out of a snobby, only the first seasons were any good attitude, but rather in an effort to confine this paper to the world of Bikini Bottom as originally designed by Stephen Hillenburg. The fact that the show's quality tapered off in its later seasons is tangential to this decision. I thought about whether to include the movies, 2004's critically acclaimed The SpongeBob SquarePants movie, and 2016's mostly forgotten but underrated Sponge Out of Water. I believe both to be non-canonical. Sponge Out of Water's non-canonicalness is fairly obvious. However, while it's easy to make the claim the 2004 movie should be considered canon, and would provide a number of useful clues as to the geopolitics of this world, the series clearly shifted course after its release, and the world building introduced in the film is often incongruous with that of the preceding seasons. Thus, neither of the movies shall be included in this essay. I will also not be including a couple of later seasons, which were made under the supervision of Stephen Hillenburg, and were a quality improvement over many of the infamous middle years. The reason for this is quite simple. Those seasons are not available on Amazon Prime. So, Part 2. A Roadmap to Madness. SpongeBob scholars throughout the years have typically gravitated to a select few theories when attempting to categorize the world of SpongeBob Squarepants. This essay shall cover the cases for and against each, and I believe will encompass the most thorough research about the subject yet written. Here are arguments for the canonical three in their briefest forms. If you do not wish to read this whole endeavor, well, first off, what part of 10,000-word essay on the geopolitics of SpongeBob did you not understand? And second, consider this section my roadmap. This is the William Barr late-night summary version of the full report. The first and most popular theory regarding SpongeBob is the city-state theorem. Quite simply, it claims that Bikini Bottom is simply one of many undersea city-states, a la Hellenic Greece or Renaissance Italy. There are pieces of evidence to suggest that its creators would be influenced by ancient Greece and/or Greek mythology, and therefore would be inclined to craft the politics of their world after it. The most obvious reference would be Atlantis, which shows up in several contradicting forms throughout the series, but appears in Season 1 as both an extant visible location as well as the realm of the gods. This would support the city-state theorem, as it resembles the way Olympus was written of in ancient Greece. Of course, Bikini Bottom is also itself a city. There is no strong evidence for the influence of Bikini Bottom extending beyond the reach of the iconic "Welcome to Bikini Bottom" sign on the outskirts of town, and arguments for its being any sort of regional power are weak. The city-state theorem rests on the fact that Bikini Bottom is a small, relatively isolated location, rather than appearing to be a cog in the machine of some vast nautical empire, or the empire itself. However, this presents its own issues. The chief issue with the idea that Bikini Bottom is a city-state is that, if it were, we would expect it to be much larger, as a metropolitan area rather than a backwater town. We will get much further in depth on this later, but the too long didn't read is that the level of sophistication in Bikini Bottom's architecture is rather low, and does not approach what we would expect from a city that was supposedly powerful enough to absorb neighbors. There are also no walls or evidence of moments of rapid expansion. The second of the canonical three theories is that Bikini Bottom is part of an undersea kingdom, with a pharaoh-like god king Neptune at its head. This theory will explain Bikini Bottom's lack of apparent power, which undermines the city-state theorem. It can also point directly to canonical scenes in the show portraying Neptune as a king and/or god, known to and worshipped by all. Under the kingdom theorem, all of the ocean is a single polity, with Neptune as its monarch, and with no other political rivals. Bikini Bottom would then be an inconsequential town in the grand scheme of things. Atlantis would serve as the empire's capital, and things would be very unitary. Politics would not be a burden to the townsfolk of Bikini Bottom, as their world is not federalized. Neptune's control would be absolute. But the kingdom theorem is untenable. It can be directly contradicted by evidence that there is a Bikini Bottom military which would cripple, if not outright disprove, the idea that Bikini Bottom is a member of unitary state. One would have to argue that this military serves the purpose of a militia rather than a standing army. But this raises further questions, for if there is a need for a militia, what are they protecting themselves from? The kingdom theorem posits that the entire sea is one polity. Perhaps each ocean is its own kingdom? But what would a small town in the middle of the Pacific need a militia for, then? It would be under no existential danger. As you can see, the kingdom theorem only raises further questions. Yet the argument that Bikini Bottom is in at least some regard monarchical will prove to be one of the strongest single lines of argument in this essay. At least that much we can say is likely true. Or is it? There is a third theory, which is the most recent proposal to enter the canonical three, and inevitably sparks controversy whenever it is mentioned, for its implications are quite frankly disturbing. The apocalypse theorem posits that Bikini Bottom is in a state of post-apocalypse, and all of its seemingly contradictory positions are purposeful. The strength of this argument is obvious. Under its parameters, all contradictions can be explained as effects from a cataclysmic event which nearly wiped out all of undersea society. It takes elements of the first two theories, claiming that SpongeBob Squarepants is mostly autonomous, but that it had, at one time, been part of an empire. In this vision, The people of Bikini Bottom are the lucky, or perhaps unlucky, survivors of a similar event. The society had once been great before it was almost completely destroyed by a failed nuclear bomb test conducted by the American government, and what we see in the show is a city that is a shell of its former self. But, as intriguing as this theory may be, the fact that it rests upon an assumption that not everything that appears in the canon will make logical sense is frustrating, and to be fair, a bit of a cop-out. Instead of approaching the question from a scientific lens, this theory allows its adherents to pick and choose bits of evidence that suit it, while dismissing countering evidence as intentionally contradictory. This is why this theory is so controversial. But it could also be that it is controversial because it feels true, and we don't want to accept it. Part 3. Flora, fauna, etc. Before we can dive into the political world of SpongeBob Squarepants, we must first identify which of its inhabitants are people and which are corollaries to animals. It is not simple enough to say that every creature in Bikini Bottom is analogous to a human, as anyone who has seen the show could tell you. Gary the Snail, for example, is clearly a cat parallel. So it would be ridiculous to build a cohesive political theory for the show's world building if we rest any part of it upon the actions of Gary, as cats rarely affect a region's geopolitical trajectory. The other species, which we can easily eliminate as being clearly a non-human parallel, is worms, which appear several times throughout the show as the world's equivalent to dogs. These species do not appear to represent the people of Bikini Bottom, and therefore will not be considered in this essay. But where exactly does one draw the line? And beyond the parameters of species, what are the races of Bikini Bottom? Are there races here? These are difficult questions, but I believe that I have found an answer. It is my conclusion that characters which belong to species which are more often thought of as land creatures are the pets of the world of SpongeBob Squarepants. In short, if you feel that you have to add the word sea in front of their species name, then they are analogous to pet animals. In addition to snails and worms, we see pet analogs in seahorses. However, identifying the line between human and animal analogs in general is much harder. A good rule of thumb is to say that vertebrates represent humans. This accounts for Sandy Cheek's ability to interact with the residents just fine without any communication issues. And it also accounts for jellyfish being butterfly analogs and mollusks being birds. However, as you are probably thinking, this interaction would mean that the very title character would not be seen in his own society as a person. This interpretation is either too dark or too incongruous for most to accept. However, instead of attempting to find a unifying flora-fauna theory, I will instead look for which of the three theories, if any, best rationalizes this discrepancy. The baseline citizen of Bikini Bottom is well established. They are bony fishes, also known as osteichthyes. They appear to make up the vast majority of Bikini Bottom's population, yet, crucially, do not appear to hold as much political or economic control. If you think about the major players of SpongeBob SquarePants, you will not think of bony fish. Osteichthyes, thank you. The most successful businessman is a crab. The most popular citizen is a lobster. The gods are mermen, and their superheroes are humans. Bony fish routinely are portrayed as Bikini Bottom's proletariat. They are often nameless or even villains. Think of Bubble Bass in Season 1, Episode 13, or Flats the Flounder in Season 2, Episode 32. And if there were to be an even lower class of citizens within this bony fish proletariat, it would be the anchovies. From the very first episodes, anchovies are portrayed as barely people, feared and hated by high-going society of Bikini Bottom. Their language is also fascinating. It appears to be a dialect partially mutually unintelligible from standard sea English. Whether this is to be accounted for as a consequence of segregation, or if the anchovies are potentially an outsider force not native to Bikini Bottom, is another question that the canonical three theories must attempt to provide a satisfying answer to. Part 5. The City-State Theorem. The earliest geopolitical theory attempting to explain the world of SpongeBob was the City-State Theorem. It is unsurprising that many took to it, as the show has taken place almost entirely within the parameters of the city itself. There are few references to any kind of polity outside of Bikini Bottom, which seems to imply A. that Bikini Bottom is the most significant political force in its region, and B, that there is little or no interaction between the various undersea cities. Both of these points would lend credence to the theory. City-states evolved by annexing surrounding towns, forming in effect a single supercity. One of the defining marks of the evolution of the Greek city-state out of the ashes of the Dark Age was the emergence of a rich upper class, which was able to assert political control over a rapidly expanding population. We can see evidence of this in Theognidia, which supports the city-state theorem. Men today honor possessions, and elite men marry into bad families, and bad men into elite families. Riches have mixed up lines of breeding, and the good breeding of the citizens is becoming obscured. This text, written as a critique of contemporary Greek culture, bears a fascinating resemblance to the design of Mr. Krabs. Mr. Krabs, the most successful businessman in Bikini Bottom, is routinely portrayed as cheap, stingy, materialistic. Indeed, he once sold SpongeBob's soul for 62 cents. But these similarities are easily dismissed as superficial. What is so striking is the description Theognis gives of bloodlines of rich and elite families. The rich having mixed up lines of breeding falls exactly, startlingly, in line with the world building of Bikini Bottom. Mr. Krabs' daughter, after all, is a whale. Could this be a hint to audiences? A clever nod to Theognis' complaint of the Greeks of his day? Supporters of the city-state theorem will often assert that this is too specific to not be intentional, though not everyone is convinced. Where is Pearl's mother? They ask. She does not make an appearance in the series, and it is quite possible that Pearl is simply adopted, rather than a product of marriage of power between an elite and a wealthy family. Also, if this theorem were true, it would explain as well why Plankton built a computer wife rather than find one of the trillions of other plankton in the sea. Plankton envies power, and knows that in Bikini Bottom society, the elite and powerful families' lines of breeding become obscured. And how much more of an obscured bloodline could one get than a single-celled creature mixed with a supercomputer? One line of attack against this theorem that we can dismiss outright is the existence of Rock Bottom. Its existence as a separate city with apparently open borders seems to go against the idea of the world of SpongeBob Squarepants consisting of a series of city-states. If they are city-states, say these critics, then why does Rock Bottom not have any sort of protection against Bikini Bottom? If you look at Greek history, you'll see that city-states is something of a misnomer. These polities evolved out of a process called Sinoicism, wherein a number of towns gave up autonomy to a central power. Under Sinoicism, most people did not migrate to the major center, but stayed in their villages of birth. Rock Bottom could be a semi-autonomous village still under the political nexus of the larger city-state of Bikini Bottom, so this does not undermine anything. Still, this theorem does not entirely hold water with me. It begins to sink when one considers the architectural sophistication and general size of Bikini Bottom. Pinning down Bikini Bottom's exact population size is difficult, and one piece of lore that has been given multiple contradictory answers. Its population does not matter so much as in the kingdom theorem, which we will explore next, and matters not at all in the apocalypse theorem, but is critical here. Greek city-states formed in part out of a massive population growth, particularly in Attica. While a later season gives an exact number of 538, it is out of range of our accepted canon of seasons 1 through 3. Our available evidence within accepted canon is sparse, variously describing Bikini Bottom as a sprawling metropolis or simply a hick town. The evidence does not necessarily disprove this notion of Bikini Bottom as a large city, which keeps the theorem alive, but neither does it further the case. However, when we look at the architecture, the theorem really starts to look suspect. Take a moment to think about the buildings of Bikini Bottom. They do not appear to possess an advanced form of construction, which one would expect out of a regional power. Everything is made out of recycled trash and things that have fallen into the ocean. An anchor here, a treasure chest there, a pineapple, a tiki head, and so on. If Bikini Bottom were powerful enough to assert political dominance over its region of the ocean, wouldn't we expect to see more in the way of infrastructure? Athens constructed grand palaces and enormous Byzantine structures of walls. We see nothing of the sort in Bikini Bottom to suggest any kind of Atlantean-like power. In fact, we do not even see much evidence that Bikini Bottom is itself the seat of power in the region. The appearance of Atlantis in its original canonical form, Atlantis Squarepants contradicts the original canon, but thankfully appears outside of our accepted time frame, is cited by believers in the city-state theorem as variously either an analog to Olympus in Greek mythology or a separate, far more powerful city-state. In effect, Bikini Bottom would be the Thebes to Atlantis' Attica, or even an Atlantean colony. But this is simply incongruous. If Bikini Bottom were a city-state, it would be the seat of its own power. Therefore, the mayor, who makes few appearances but is still canon, would be the Basileus or Archon in power. But Atlantis presents Neptune as the king, and he clearly is the king regnant over the citizens of Bikini Bottom and the ultimate authority figure in the land. The fact is, the city-state theorem rests upon the shaky assumption that Bikini Bottom is the most dominant political force in the area, when the evidence, more often than not, points to it being an insignificant small town. Part 5. The Kingdom Theorem. One moment. The natural evolution of the city-state theorem is therefore to assert that Bikini Bottom, as a city, does hold some authority, but only at a local level. The actual state is then the entire sea, ruled over by Neptune, with Bikini Bottom being just one of countless towns beneath Neptune's control. Therefore, its mayor will still hold some power, and Rock Bottom would simply be a neighboring town. Comparisons to Theognis and the city-state theorem are cute but superficial. This theorem, its supporters say, has no major holes. Its strength is its simplicity. Why would the creators of a children's show be so meticulous with their canon? Why bother referencing classical Greece or even allude to political systems its audience would not know? Children are simple creatures. They understand simple power structures like monarchies, and that's what most children's shows go with anyway. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Sophia the First, Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure, they all base themselves in simply easy-to-understand political terms. Why should we expect a show about a talking kitchen sponge to be any different? The strength in the kingdom theorem lies in what we do not see in the show. We do not see any sort of defensive fortification sealing Bikini Bottom off from the rest of the ocean, which would suggest a sort of city-state. We do not see a very strong executive power. The city's mayor only makes 2 appearances during our accepted canonical time frame, nor do we see any direct references to a Bikini Bottom-specific military. Mr. Krabs references being in the Navy a few times, but this could just as easily be an ocean-wide organization. Neither does he state that he was in the Bikini Bottom military. The argument is therefore one of Occam's razor. This is the simplest solution. And it is true in many ways. The kingdom theorem is perhaps the least disagreeable one, with the fewest holes to pick at. Anything which can be attributed to evidence for the city-state theorem can also be attributed to being a sign of the show depicting a monarchy, or dismissed out of hand as insignificant reaches of logic. The large city which appears on screen for a moment in Pizza Delivery can be taken as another city-state, but is it not more simple to assume that it's simply another city within the same realm? Again, we do not see any of the sort of infrastructure or fortifications one would expect out of a city-state, even though we do not see it for very long. And those references to Atlantis and apparent gods of Greek history? Well, it just comes with the property. You make a show about an undersea civilization for long enough, you'll make an Atlantis reference. And the show is not strictly homaging Greece. After all, they named their king Neptune. The area in which he and SpongeBob have their Krabby Patty making duel is clearly a Colosseum, not a Greek-style amphitheater. Note, the SpongeBob wiki explicitly calls the Poseidon Greek in style, though this is clearly erroneous, and we should not really trust people who invest their spare time into writing extensively about SpongeBob's lore to know much about historical architectural style. But the kingdom theorem is not airtight by any means. For example, the biggest logical flaw lies in there being a national anthem for Bikini Bottom. Oh, Bikini Bottom, we pledge our hearts to you, as faithful and deep and true and blue as you, Bikini Bottom, we love you. I probably botched that. But while Mr. Krabs being in the Navy does not preclude the existence of a unified kingdom, it does raise more questions than it answers, should we accept the kingdom theorem as truth. What need would a single undersea kingdom have for a military? This would suppose a complete political control over the ocean, making a standing army superfluous. It could be that this kingdom has something of a military-industrial complex, are overspenders, or that the military is more of a militia force. But it could also suppose that Bikini Bottom is a city within one of a great many of sea kingdoms, which would be potentially fascinating. Would there be more mythological gods of the sea ruling other kingdoms or oceans? Does Mananan Mac Lear command an Atlantic empire? And does he train his sword at Neptune's Pacific? I find this doubtful, as nothing of this sort of lore has ever appeared in SpongeBob's history, even including later seasons, though we do get continued reference to Bikini Bottom possessing its own military. As interesting as this idea may be, it seems as though it has never been on the minds of the show's creators. This then creates a paradox which kingdom theorem adherents must resolve. Are there no other undersea kingdoms? If there are no other undersea kingdoms, then how can there be a military? And if there is a military, then how can there be no one for it to fight? Frequently cited needs include combating piracy and other brigands. Pirates are clearly shown as canonical in several early episodes, most notably in Dying for Pie. And the adventures of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy indicate that the city is not without its nuances that an organized armed force should be on the ready for. But in the case of these villains, wouldn't the police suffice? And none of this happily resolves the issue of Bikini Bottom having a national anthem. But if the national anthem tidbit disqualifies the kingdom theorem, it certainly cannot validate the city-state theorem. A national anthem implies something more sprawling and advanced than a city-state. And again, we have seen that there are no clear references to there being any kind of significant executive power vested in Bikini Bottom. The mayor's appearances feel largely ceremonial. Even King Neptune, despite the fear he incurs when he chooses to show up, does not seem to hold any explicit political power. It's almost like no one knows who's in control. It's almost like... No, that can't be right. Can it? Part 6. The Apocalypse Theorem. At precisely 9 in the morning, on July 1st, 1946, the skies above Bikini Atoll were devoured in flames. A brilliant ball of light burst forth from the sea surrounding of the tiny, hitherto insignificant island, and rocked the stars before giving way to ash and pitch-black smoke. Ships were destroyed, debris hurtled through the air, and through the pristine island lay miles away from the epicenter in a single moment of blinding light, it was rendered uninhabitable. The U.S. government had just conducted a test of a nuclear bomb. They considered it a total failure. Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, an advisor to the operation, blamed the atomic bomb's lack of complete destruction on the crew, saying they must have simply missed their target. This is unsubstantiated, but Colonel Tibbets would know a thing or two about this. He was the man who first wrought nuclear war upon the world. Now, to be clear, the issue of nuclear warfare is heavy and complicated, and far more people than Tibbets had parts to play in its realization on August 6, 1945. But it was Tibbets who piloted the Enola Gay, named for his mother, into the skies above Hiroshima that morning, and it was Paul W. Tibbets who would let the bomb drop and see from the safety of his cockpit the enormous mushroom cloud that enveloped the city after. So the man is clearly no slouch when it comes to nuclear weaponry. He's one of only 2 people to have ever unleashed a nuclear weapon in wartime, after all. So perhaps we should take him at his word that the crew in charge of dropping the test bomb in the waters off of Bikini Atoll that day did miss their target. But what they missed isn't the interesting part. It's what they hit. The apocalypse theorem is a theory which is so absurd on its face that I would not blame you if you dismissed it out of hand at first encounter. It's an uncomfortable prospect for some, though it is far from untrodden territory when it comes to theories about children's media. A similar theory has been popularized surrounding Disney's 1992 classic Aladdin. Editorial note: this theory is stupid as it pertains to Aladdin, but that doesn't mean that it can't be applied to SpongeBob SquarePants. What if the reason why nothing about the geopolitical world of SpongeBob SquarePants makes sense is that the residents of Bikini Bottom themselves are unsure of what the structure is? What if those allusions to Atlantis are more than low-hanging fruit pop culture references, but hints at a more sinister backstory than any of us could have possibly assumed? The apocalypse theorem is this. There was, once upon a time, a powerful sea kingdom, perhaps Atlantis. Then, something happened. That kingdom was destroyed by a cataclysmic event, typically attributed to an atomic bomb. This atomic bomb wiped out the societal structures that had been previously built, and no one really knows who's in charge right now. There had once been a king, but his ability to rule over his domain has been devastated. His own household guard has been decimated after the aftermath. This is why King Neptune sought out a fry cook in Neptune's spatula. He must have lost his best cooks in the explosion. This theory explains as well the discrepancies between Bikini Bottom and the surrounding towns. Rock Bottom appears to have taken the brunt of the toxic blow. Its streets are sparse, and those who have survived are still dealing with mutations caused by residual radiation. The clean, modern city, shown briefly in Pizza Delivery, and the sophisticated high-rise buildings of Tentacle Acres are located far enough away from the blast to have escaped the level of destruction Bikini Bottom has had to endure. The fish people in this world are clearly capable of sophisticated modern construction. But Bikini Bottom isn't as fortunate. It is little more than a wasteland. It is a shrine to the devastation of a nuclear apocalypse. Mr. Krabs lives in the anchor of one of the sunken ships. Bits and pieces of metal sank into the ocean to be turned into the city's new center. Whatever life existed before the blast, there bears no trace of it now. Despite the outlandish nature of these claims, several elements of it actually bear concrete evidence in favor of it. For example, the fact that Bikini Bottom lies in the waters below Bikini Atoll is essentially confirmed. Footage of the explosion has been used in the show, and though the iconic island is often shown to be above the surface, it is not a carbon copy of Bikini Atoll, it evokes it in several ways. The island is tiny and uninhabited, containing only a pine tree bearing coconuts. This is intentional. The word bikini in Bikini Atoll does not refer to the two-piece swimsuit. In fact, this nuclear test predates the innovation of the bikini by a decade. It comes from the Marshallese word pikini, which means coconut place. That the single defining feature of the island is a tree with coconuts, and that the creators have used the video of the Bikini Atoll explosion several times, are correlations which are far stronger than anything the previous two theories have to offer. Bikini Bottom is definitively located beneath Bikini Atoll. But it does not stop there. The presence of Goo Lagoon helps strengthen this theory, as the first atomic bomb dropped upon Bikini Atoll landed in a lagoon itself. Perhaps this strange beach within the ocean is a tiny silver lining amongst this backdrop of nuclear disaster, a phenomenon created by being directly beneath the bomb's blast, perhaps named for what it did to the surrounding waters. In Band Geeks, SpongeBob mentions the presence of toxic waste dumps, yet we don't see any kind of nuclear power in the world of SpongeBob. It follows then that the community is well aware of the disaster that befell them, and has been working throughout the years to remove the most toxic radioactive material to a safe distance away from the city. And what other explanation can there be for the existence of such supervillains as the Dirty Bubble? His name is even suspiciously close to Dirty Bomb. We can even see mutations, probably due to nuclear fallout, extend to the main cast. Squidward, despite his name, is canonically an octopus, yet he has 6, not 8 legs. No wonder he's so cranky. I feel obligated to bring up the tentative connections between SpongeBob SquarePants and T.S. Eliot's famous poem, The Wasteland. Some say you can find subtle references in the show to Eliot's work, most often in the second section of the sprawling epic. A line describing a drowned Phoenician sailor whose pearls were his eyes is ascribed to Mr. Krabs, who lives inside an anchor which could be a sign of a shipwreck, i.e. the drowned sailor, and whose daughter's name is Pearl. Perhaps more compelling is the mention of the one-eyed merchant, which has been attributed to Plankton. There are more passages which have been cited as potentially referenced in the show, though they only get more tenuous from here. I'm including these two for the sake of thoroughness, though to be clear, while the apocalypse theorem is quite compelling, this particular bit feels quite like a stretch. Literary allusions aside, the argument this theory presents is clear. Disorder is order. The structures of power are so blurred because what has once been a stable society has been shaken by the fires of nuclear recklessness. Neptune is a king de jure, but a king without a kingdom. He roams the seas aimlessly, looking to replenish his own royal guard before he can effectively reassert control over his old dominion. Meanwhile, the cities which once knew him as their monarch have been left to their own devices, struggling to survive in their post-apocalypse. Neptune has become more legend than ruler, a being to be worshipped but not necessarily obeyed. It is a society teetering on the edge, plagued by radioactive supervillains and forced to scavenge bits of broken metal for shelter. It explains the lack of power structures, the architecture, the society, and the choice of location. There is one final bit of evidence that, rationally speaking, is a simple coincidence, but one in such a cosmic sense, one so incredibly specific, that it's almost like watching the universe laugh at you. It's as though the show has been telling us all the truth of its backstory since the very first episode, knowing it would go over everyone's head. The advisor to the Bikini Atoll atomic tests was named Paul W. Tibbets. Steven Hillenberg's co-executive producer, a writer and storyboard artist from the show's earliest days, and the man he trusted most to helm the show once he stepped down, was Paul Tibbet. I am not the first to put this theory forward. I will not be the last. But I do believe that I have put in the most attention to detail, the most rigorous logical examination of the concept so far written. The usual tropes of this theory do not quite sit right with me. This vision of a dystopian post-apocalypse, nestled within a show which preaches optimism and levity at every turn, is just too much to bear. Hello? Adventure Time? Of course, the grim nature of this theory is part of its own appeal. There's something so fascinating about a backstory so sinister for a show so positive and upbeat. Adventure Time? You ever hear one of these songs that has happy-sounding music but dark lyrics? Adventure Time? And beyond simply entertainment, this kind of backstory would make sense strategically for the show's creators, as it allows them to seemingly contradict their own lore on a whim. Consistently inconsistent, you might say. The apocalypse theorem has taken hold as the most prominent theory lately, and you can find more people asserting its validity pretty easily through Google. But, just as has been the case with the other two theories, it's never quite sat right by me. As intriguing as it may be, there's always been something wrong with it I've never been able to articulate. I do know that it is wrong. It has to be wrong. Yet how? On the surface, it explains everything. There is a finite amount of information available on SpongeBob Squarepants. It is not an impossible task to learn everything there is to learn about it. If we are only to count the first 3 seasons, then one could watch every episode in under 24 hours. Then again, it takes much more than a single watch to appreciate everything about the show. How many jokes went over our heads as children? How many references to pieces of literature and pop culture did we miss? In order to know everything there is to know about this show, we must dive deeper. It is difficult, but it can be done. Animated TV, especially a cartoon of SpongeBob's era, typically runs at a rate of 24 frames per second. Additionally, each drawing will appear for 2 frames, meaning that there are about 12 different drawings a second in an episode of SpongeBob Squarepants. Extrapolating this over 3 seasons, totaling 60 22-minute episodes, we reach a total of 950,400 total drawings used in the show's first 3 seasons. If we were to print out every single one of these drawings on sheets of printer paper and stack them on top of each other in a single tower, it would rise 311 feet in the air, higher than the Statue of Liberty. This is our Babel. Within this tower lies the entirety of information available about our accepted canon. Sift through it all, and you will find your answers. Do not lose a single page. Do not let Babel fall. Read and memorize every single paper. If it seems like it's not coming to anything, tell yourself it doesn't matter. Just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Part 7. Babel. Why did God react with fury when humanity built the Tower of Babel? What about this pursuit of knowledge, of contact with the divine, enraged him so that he shattered the world into different languages, different peoples? Was he hiding a secret that lay at heaven's gate? Was he just bored, like a child dropping a match into an anthill? Throughout all of human history, we have been taught that knowledge is a forbidden fruit. We must not dig too far, leave some questions unanswered, collapse Babel before it scrapes heaven's door. What secrets are we as humans simply never meant to know? It is now May. I believe I know everything there is to know about the month of May. It is the 5th month of the year, right after April and before June. It contains 31 days. It was named after the Greek goddess Maya. In most American university systems, it is the final month of the academic year. My father's birthday is May 16th. It lies in the middle of spring, a season which for all existence has been associated with life, rebirth, optimism, and light. And on May 1st, 1999, SpongeBob Squarepants debuted on television. And if one can know everything there is to know about the month of May, why is it that other things are apparently forbidden? Why was Eve forbidden from eating the fruit of the forbidden tree? Why must Babel fall? I suspect there are many Babels throughout history, which have been constructed, or at least attempted, concerning all kinds of subjects. It's incredible the depth of knowledge some have over such insignificant things. I once met a girl who could name every contestant in the history of the show Big Brother, and which episode they were eliminated in. My grandfather could tell you the winner of Best Picture for every year of the Academy's existence, right up until he died. I do not know if these two had to pay some sort of price for mastery of their own Towers of Babel. I do not know if I will have to as well. I'm just going to keep going. The encouraging thing about my Babel is that most frames of SpongeBob Squarepants are rather dull. The early episodes especially had a more muted color palette and simple backgrounds. There could be a few flowers in the sky above and swirling, shifting sands in the background, but most of what there is to know about the world is placed directly in front and center of the shot. The show does not seem intent on keeping its secrets very close to the chest. It's daring me to unlock them, to pull that secret string. So, I keep going. Yet there are more moments in the show which remain undeciphered, like an ancient language long since extinct. No matter how long I look at it, I do not understand the moment in Secret Box where milk tips over in Patrick's mind. I still do not understand what SpongeBob meant by licking doorknobs being illegal on other planets. I tuck these moments away. Babel will not be complete until their meanings are known, but I will not let them slow me down. There is still so much more to go. You'll often see programs on TV concerning ancient wonders, some mythical, some real, where the host will inevitably ask the audience how these things could have been built. The kooky ones may offer up aliens as an answer. The more academic shows may go into ancient technology and construction techniques which they may have used. Even as a child, I had the same reaction to every one of these shows. Frankly, I never really cared about the how. I cared about the why. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we build enormous golden shrines to beings that, if they exist at all, would regard them as no more than blips on the Earth's surface? Why do we build enormous tombs to lie in after we die? What drove the ancient Egyptians to make pyramids face magnetic north? To mummify their dead? To war in Kadesh? I keep going. Season 2 slips into the third. The palette lightens. The style gets more professional. Some of the charm is removed for the sake of more fluid animation. Meanwhile, in Egypt, a pharaoh's brain is removed for the sake of a better afterlife. Meanwhile, in Thailand, an enormous golden statue is built to honor a man who died 2,500 years ago. It stands 9 feet shorter than our Babel. Meanwhile, in 2002, Steven Hillenburg announces that SpongeBob SquarePants will go on hiatus as he works on the movie, which he intends to be the show's finale. The animation suffers further. It looks crisper and brighter than the early drawings, but the charm is gone entirely. The animators are ready to be done. They're phoning it in at this point. The last episode of Season 3, Pranks a Lot, involves SpongeBob and Patrick using invisible spray for most of the episode. It's as if the animators were ashamed of looking at their own creation, as if they wanted a plot that would give them the least amount of work possible. Certainly gives me less work. One moment. Okay. Part 8. A858DE45F56D9BC9. In 2001, Redditors discovered a strange, obscure subreddit called R858DE45F56D9BC9. It contained nothing more than posts consisting of strings of letters and numbers. Immediately upon discovery, the site's users took to assuming the posts were a code, and a sister subreddit, R solving 8858, was opened up as the internet teamed up to crack the secret. As time went on, a few posts were solved. One decoded message contained the phrase "No to SOPA," an anti-privacy internet act which was being debated in Congress at the time, and another unveiled a series of GIFs of former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin. Eventually, the creator of A858DE45F56D9BC9 caught on to his subreddit's fame. He, or she, or they, or it, conducted an AMA, or an Ask Me Anything, with some of the code breakers, typing his answers, of course, in code. When asked for the purpose behind it all, the decrypted answer read as follows: "We cannot disclose the purpose. A858 will end when the purpose is disclosed or discovered." Frustrating, yet encouraging. And so Reddit carried on, determined now more than ever to unlock the mystery of R A858DE45F56D9BC9. A few more lines of code were successfully decrypted. One message read, "Happy New Year 2001. Bits and pieces came together, and it seemed like there was new momentum for the code breakers. But still, the final answers proved elusive. For 5 years, this game of cat and mouse went on. Suddenly, in 2016, R A858DE45F56D9BC9 went private. A final uncoded message was posted to the subreddit. The A858 project has concluded. You may unsubscribe. Yes, a few pieces of code were decrypted. A few Easter eggs were uncovered. But there was never a grand purpose revealed. No answer, no closure. People spent 5 years working on a project which effectively ended in a blue screen. Nothing lay at the end of this rainbow. My father taught me a bit of esoterica when I was little. The scientific term for seeing shapes in clouds is nephelococcygia. It's a neat word, fun to say, and if you're in a nerdy enough company, it can be a neat party trick. For one man, Jeff Bird, it appears far more than that. He was a contestant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire who advanced all the way to the final question, which asked him to provide the definition of the word nephelococcygia, a definition which he did not know. I feel like the reason why I have always remembered the meaning of this word is that it applies to the real world all too often. It is just a general statement that people see when they wish to see in what they wish to see in things, Rorschach could have told you this as well. Those clouds aren't arranging themselves into the shape of your dead dog just to please you. That spattering of ink isn't an elephant, or a butterfly, or your mother screaming at you. They are arbitrary, heartless formations of water vapor or ink, and they are not sentient. They do not intend to resemble anything. Paranormal investigators like to use a device known as a spirit box, which scans between radio frequencies very quickly, creating a wall of static. They claim that spirits can speak through the box, and that you can hear their voice come through the static if they're feeling controversial or conversational. Any voice which lasts longer than a second, they say, has to be a spirit. And if you watch enough of these kinds of shows, you'll see this device capture voices time and time again. But, like our A858, like a curious cloud formation, no real meaning is ever unearthed. These shows all have to caption these voices, as if the producers know that it's all bunk and they have to lead the viewer into hearing order where there is only disorder. Is this all I'm doing? Looking for patterns in white noise? Seeing shapes in clouds? I'm trying to pick the brain of a dead man. What if the answer is as simple as Steven Hillenburg deciding to set a silly children's show in the Pacific and saw an opportunity to hide something of a double entendre under the guise of a history reference? Is that not truly Occam's razor? Or is what Steven Hillenburg intended not the question? Because here's the thing. When I look into the sky and I see the face of a dog, that doesn't mean I'm crazy. It just means my brain is doing something it's been hardwired to do. We humans are funny creatures. We are always scanning for patterns. And in these patterns we find, they tell us a lot about ourselves. The Rorschach test, though not without its critics, has proven itself a valuable tool in measuring the disorder in the thoughts of schizophrenia patients. Our A858's unsolved status is in a way more fascinating than any revolution which it could be hiding. Would it be half as interesting today if it had been solved in 2011? The spirit box... okay, well that's just bunk, but the point is clear. It's not about building a tower tall enough to hear the voice of God. It's not about what its creators intended. In a way, there are millions of bikini bottoms, all these various parts assembling in different orders within our heads, creating a picture unique to all of us, always colored by our own biases, our own experiences and beliefs. You will be hard-pressed to find many kids who empathize with Squidward. SpongeBob and Patrick are almost always their choice of favorite. Yet you often find older fans coming back to the show declaring their allegiance to Squidward. The show didn't change. It stays the same. We change. So in the millions of bikini bottoms lies a further indeterminable number of alterations, as different elements of the show take on a new light as we grow. They are all correct. They are all the bikini bottom that we need at that moment in time, and to tell someone else that their creation is wrong would be as pointless as telling someone that what they see in that cloud is not a dog, but a truck. They're both right. It is impossible to be wrong. The oft-forgotten relativist theory of SpongeBob Squarepants Geopolitics. It is impossible to be wrong. All that said, I now know what my vision of Bikini Bottom is, and I'd like to tell you what I see in the clouds. What never sat right with me is that about the idea that Bikini Bottom is an apocalyptic scene is the tone. It's not that the show has never been dark, there's plenty of dark humor in the show actually, but that the show has always preached optimism. It is a happy show. SpongeBob is a naive character, yes, and sure, Squidward's nihilism becomes more relatable as I grow older, but I don't think that the show is meant to make you agree with Squidward. Remember, nobody wants to be a Squidward. I spent so many unhappy mornings as a child, and so often these unhappy mornings would turn into pleasant evenings as I watched the antics of this little yellow hero, even if it was an episode I had seen countless times before. Everything about the show made me happy, from the iconic music, to its art design, to its jokes, to its general joie de vivre. To twist all this into an image of destruction and chaos may work for some, but in my own interpretation, it cannot be. I agree that the show is set beneath Bikini Atoll, and that Bikini Bottom is most likely the wreckage of the ships that the bomb did destroy. I also agree that some dark backstory exists. I simply think the show is a creation story, not the end of times. Part 9. Nevertheless, they persisted. Something happened in 1177 BCE. I mean, duh, something happened. Lots of things happen every year. Except 2016, nothing happened in 2016. But something catastrophic happened. An entire era in human history came to a sudden, violent end. The Bronze Age collapse destroyed civilization in the Mediterranean. The Mycenaean, Minoan, Trojan, Hittite, and Babylonian cultures all vanished from the map. There are competing claims as to how this could have happened. The most likely answer is that it was a perfect storm of a bunch of different problems which, individually, would probably not have been such an existential threat, but together upended civilization after civilization. The most enduring theory concerning the societal collapse is that of the Sea People. Stone tablets dating from the era contain hieroglyphs which talk of Egyptian pharaohs leading armies against foreign peoples of the sea. Stories of these mysterious invaders persist for about a century before vanishing just as suddenly as the Bronze Age civilizations did. Historians endlessly debate these texts. Some are skeptical of their stories entirely. Most accept them as at least partially true, but there is no consensus over who these people could be. Greeks, Minoans, Philistines, Hittites, or perhaps even a completely unknown people. While I believe that the failed nuclear test creates much of the backdrop for SpongeBob SquarePants, I, like most historians who study the Bronze Age collapse, believe it to be only one moment in a perfect storm of disasters which destroyed a kingdom which had once been ruled over by Neptune. I think that invaders, either anchovies or nematodes or both, played a role in a societal collapse. We can see evidence of aftershocks of this kind of invasion in the very first episode, where a horde of anchovies come to the Krusty Krab. Their very presence was a sheer terror to Mr. Krabs, a grizzled Navy veteran. Of course nematodes also roam these parts of the sea, as we see in Home Sweet Pineapple. Undersea societies survived these invasions, but now the descendants of these invading hordes are seen as low members of society, therefore creating the anchovy proletariat. The barbarians of SpongeBob SquarePants Geopolitics. Yet I do not wish to linger on this darkness. This is the backstory to my interpretation of Bikini Bottom, yes, but not the centerpiece. Mycenaean Greece collapsed around 1177 BCE. A centuries-long dark age ensued. Very little is known about this era of Greece because it seems that the writing itself may have disappeared in the corner of the world for a while as these people worked to pick up the pieces of what had been. Slowly, Greece pulled itself into the light, and while we cannot see this through written works, the story is etched in their pottery, their buildings, their cities. What emerged from the destruction of the Mycenaean age was something far greater and grander in power. Athens and Sparta became the most powerful cities of classical antiquity. Not long after, Alexander would ride forth from the north and conquer the world. Yet, yes, disasters befell Bikini Bottom. But that's not the point of the show. The point is that they survived. Try as I might, I cannot see a post-apocalyptic society in Bikini Bottom. It has a flourishing business center, casinos, and restaurants. It has a strong education system and a dedicated police force. It holds Olympic Games and maintains pristine fields of natural beauty. Its citizens are lovers of art, music, and cuisine. The world threw everything it had at Bikini Bottom. Nevertheless, it persisted. Its people are resourceful. They turned scraps of metal into skyscrapers. They found a sunken treasure chest and turned it into a supermarket. SpongeBob as a character is the encapsulation of everything I see in the show. He always keeps going, even if a bit naively. He never stops trying, no matter what. If he sees a problem, he launches himself at it, and he keeps trying until he solves it, no matter how many tries it may take. Bikini Bottom is a place where anyone can pursue their dreams. Mr. Krabs achieved this by creating the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob never stops chasing his passions. Even the series' more antagonistic characters, Squidward and Plankton, never give up on their dreams. Sandy Cheeks is the embodiment of the human spirit and drive to explore and innovate. How one can look at all this and call it a wasteland is beyond me. To be clear, I am not asserting that SpongeBob SquarePants is actually some ultra-clever history joke. I cannot claim to know what the Bikini Bottom in Stephen Hillenburg's mind looked like. I mention the Sea People only as an analogy to explain my own interpretation of the show. Just as Bronze Age society collapsed and rose again, so did Bikini Bottom. It seems antithetical to the show's spirit to claim otherwise. I think that one of the biggest pieces of symbolism has lain right under our noses the entire time. Squidward's house. An Easter Island tiki head, Squidward chooses to make his home in a place that is a daily reminder of collapsed civilizations. Whatever befell the inhabitants of Easter Island, it wiped them out entirely. They left behind only giant heads of stone who have watched over the island ever since. But Bikini Bottom persisted. Squidward took what for most is a symbol of extinction and turned it into his own palace. He adorned it with art. He took up the clarinet, painting, dance, a violent passion for all things cultural. And although he is a cynic, and though he is a grouch, he never gives up his pursuits. Consider Patrick Star. Starfish are resilient creatures, able to regrow limbs if they are lost. They are prehistoric things, older than the dinosaurs. They have lived through extinction events which have claimed more species than is comprehensible, and thrive to this day, abundant in all the world's oceans. Patrick is the butt of many jokes, depicted as stupid but kind. Yet he, just as everyone else in Bikini Bottom, is a fighter. Give him so much as a rock and some sand, and he'll make it into a damn house. Consider Plankton, the one-eyed merchant who serves as the series' main villain. He is the most simple life form in the world, consisting of a single cell, yet he aspires to be so much more. You can see this in the computer wife he built for himself. He built Karen what he aspires to be, the exact opposite in terms of advancedness as he. She puts him down and discourages his pursuits, yet he perseveres. He will never stop fighting to be more than a single cell crying out in the dark. And you know what? I'm rooting for him. Consider Bikini Atoll. It was not a desolate island when the U.S. government chose it to be the site of a new round of nuclear tests. 167 natives had to be evicted to the nearby Ragnarok Atoll. Ben Wyatt, the U.S. military governor of the Marshall Islands, likened himself to God leading the people of Israel to the chosen land. The chieftain supposedly gave his blessing for the tests to begin, but the people of Bikini Atoll have never been satisfied with their exile. Ragnarok Atoll did not have the abundance of natural resources that Bikini Atoll did, and within a few years the exilees were malnourished to the point of starvation. They moved again to the island of Kili, which was not much better. Their culture of lagoon fishing slowly died out as Kili did not have good fishing waters, and they became dependent on the U.S. government sending supplies. Not content to endure this way of life, the surviving residents of Bikini Atoll returned to their homeland in 1974. 4 years later, it was clear that their home was not ready for them. Suffering from the effects of radiation, the effort to resettle their homeland was abandoned. Bikini Atoll remains uninhabited to this day, but that does not mean its people have given up hope of coming home. 600 of Bikini Atoll's children still live on Kili Island. They sleep in cinder block homes. They use generators to create electricity. The children go to school. Their parents sell what little wares they have. The U.S. government continues to provide these people with a meager ration of food. They've lost their home and their culture, but not their spirit. One day, one glorious day, they will come home. They too will persist. 10. Where we go from here. There's a song from Season 5 special Atlantis Squarepants that I've always liked way more than I feel like I should. I know, intellectually, that it's aiming for comedy through melodrama, but it's always felt to me like a microcosm of what the character of SpongeBob represents to us. The sun must set at the end of every day, and the curtain must fall at the end of every play, and every little bubble ever blown must someday pop. Like presents on Christmas Day, it doesn't seem to stay. Or a cheese souffle, it doesn't last all day. I will try again to blow a bubble that will last all day. One day, SpongeBob SquarePants will air its final episode. It may not even happen in our own lifetimes, but even Methuselah dies one day. And that's okay. SpongeBob ending won't mean that children will no longer be able to watch it. The old episodes will still be there. It will still survive in all its various other forms of media, its books and video games and accessories. When Steven Hillenburg first set out to create the show, he was hoping for a single season and possibly reaching some cult status. He obviously believed in his show and was proud of his product, but never did he think it would last a decade. 2 decades. It even outlived him. Or is this the wrong way of looking at it? The show wasn't pulled from thin air. It contains elements of him in its stories, its art, its outlook on life. Many of the show's stories were pulled from moments in his life and moments in the lives of the producers, the secret box, and learning how to curse like a sailor among the many. The show preserves these memories, as well as the vision and personality of its creator. In a very real sense, you can say Steven Hillenburg cheated death. So maybe I was wrong to call SpongeBob a modern-day Methuselah. Methuselah only had one life, after all. But not SpongeBob. The story of SpongeBob is not just of fictional undersea antics. Maybe at one time it was, but it's grown into something more. It's become a lodestar for an entire generation. We have all imprinted our own memories upon certain scenes, which have now transformed into time capsules which take us back to some younger, more vulnerable time. When the world seemed larger and friendlier, or smaller and friendlier and still full of secrets, where it was easier to take advice along the lines of, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And now, in our jaded sense of quarter-life wisdom, we look at this world and determine that it could not possibly be so upbeat. Maybe Squidward was right after all. Maybe the entire landscape is just a nightmare fashioned out of nuclear destruction. If this is your vision of Bikini Bottom, I'm not going to tell you it is incorrect, only that I feel sorry that this is what you see when you reach the summit of Babel. All I see is hope. It is nothing bad will ever happen to you. I don't think even SpongeBob himself is naive enough to believe that. It's that when hardship strikes us, we never give up. We keep going and going and going, and if the world gives us even so much as a big rock, big enough to sleep under, we'll make it into a goddamn house. We will keep doing what we love, even if it's not what we're necessarily good at or what pays the best. We will treat everyone as a potential new friend. We will always be ready. I'll be right back.